Today, see how Tanium's Enforce module manages Windows AppLocker. We've hit that time of year leading up to our annual Converge conference when new product releases get quiet right before the big main stage announcements that they make every year at Converge, right? So that means this is the perfect time to talk about some helpful existing features that you might not be using yet. And one of those features that we've supported for a long time is managing Windows AppLocker policies with Tanium Enforce. And many customers enjoy the quick turnaround on benefits that Tanium provides here. But before I introduce our guest, I have a special code for a free pass to Converge coming up in Orlando, Florida this November. All the main stage announcements, the hands-on labs, capture the flag, which is going to be new this year, a new twist. It's going to be good. Certification exams, all those customer story breakouts, and a special evening event, Orlando style, right? This is what we would love to give you a free pass for. So it's good for virtual and in-person as well as the labs. And you'll want to sign up as soon as possible because you know those labs fill up fast. So see the details in the show notes below with the promo code to use and all that goodness. And you will get to meet today's guest in person at Converge and maybe even take one of his labs. So for today's topic, you'll recognize our guest. Back with us is our Microsoft Technologies expert, Rob Brawl. And you've seen his popular episodes like deploying MDE, the Tanium client for Azure VMs, the provision walkthrough episode, and some others. So Rob, welcome back to the show. Please introduce yourself for those who might not have met you yet.
Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, my name's Rob. I'm part of the UK team here at Tanium, been here coming up to 4 years now. Not quite sure where that time went. I am part of our domain architect function, specializing in endpoint management. And what that really means is I help both our customers, our internal colleagues, prospects, anybody that wants to use Tanium to manage their endpoints effectively. So that could be provision. Obviously, Windows 11 end of life is on everybody's minds at the moment. So how can we use provision to help you migrate to Windows 11, as well as where we've launched AEM capabilities with patch and deploy recently, and how customers can use those to do more with less and quicker.
Yeah, there was a fun video clip of Rob and I last year at Converge at the reception circulating on social media. So if you look back at our Tanium LinkedIn feed, you might find that. So Rob, what are you going to be doing at Converge this year?
I know what I'm doing for at least two things, and there's possibly some other stuff as well, but I'm back doing labs. So I'm running a lab on AI agents. So we did one last year on Security Copilot and ServiceNow integrations. And what we've done is over the last year, the product capability with Security Copilot has grown. So we've gone from just asking questions kind of in a similar way that you might have done within Interact to an agent within Security Copilot. And what that means is we can say, go and investigate this alert from threat response for me, please. And rather than you maybe having to ask 8-10 questions to get that level of detail, Security Copilot looks at that alert and tells you everything that you could possibly want to know about it. So, you know, what's the command line that's been run? What does it mean? Where else am I seeing it happen? What might I want to do about it? I'm working with another colleague from Europe on an OT technologies lab. So that, again, is something new that we're bringing to the market. So looking at what we can do with that. Might also be involved in some breakouts potentially. Still working on those at the moment. It's still the summer, just about. So yeah, looking forward to it. It'll be great. The weather in Orlando is so much nicer than the UK in November as well.
Oh yes, everybody loves the weather in Orlando. I guess except for that hot, sticky time of the year, but in November, oh yeah, it's just right. Yeah, we had a
Yeah.
great time last year. So yeah, folks, if you get to Converge, use the free pass below. You still got to pay for your travel, right? But use the free pass below, and you'll get to meet Rob and a bunch of other people who have been on this show and see them in person. And typically, I'm looking at selfies turning up on social media with Tanium celebrities, and that's a lot of fun to get to ask your questions in person before you take your certification exam. That's another benefit too. So, all right, well, we got to get to today's topic. So we're talking about AppLocker for Windows and how Tanium helps. So, Rob, why don't you start us off for those who may not know what AppLocker is or does? What is it?
So AppLocker is part of Windows. It's been built in for a number of years now. And fundamentally, it allows you to control what can or cannot be run on a device. And you can tie that down by different classes of users. You've got administrators versus regular standard users. It can work in a couple of different ways. So you can put it in a block unless I say otherwise mode. Equally, you can turn it around and use it in a permitted unless I've explicitly blocked it mode. Most customers that I talk to now are looking to use it in the former. Unless you meet these conditions, you're not running it. It's really good from a compliance standpoint. Tackling things like portable applications is a common use case for it. One use case I've seen for alternative mode, so the permitted unless I say otherwise mode, is for doing things like blocking PowerShell execution by standard users, that kind of thing. So lots of things that you can do with it. Really useful, flexible tool. And with Windows 10 and Windows 11, it also exists on Windows Server platforms. It's there for all licenses now. So in earlier versions of Windows, you needed some of the more expensive SKUs to do it. But if you have a licensed Windows 11 device now, it doesn't matter what version of that you're on.
Sounds like that would also be really helpful with like retail or banking kiosks where you've got
Yeah.
really locked down machines. All right. So how does Tanium help with that specifically? Why would I, in other words, Microsoft does this. Why would I add Tanium to the mix?
Yeah, absolutely. So Tanium manages AppLocker through Enforce, which if you're familiar with that, you'll already know is all around policy management, things like BitLocker, as well as removable storage access control. Where we add value there is making it easier, as well as then reporting on it. So in previous roles, I've implemented AppLocker, and it can be a bit of a bear to get right. If you think about everything that's running on a device, put that into a rule and don't break everything. Microsoft provides some really good guidance as to how to get started, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But it's then being able to understand all of those legacy apps, other stuff that's on my device that doesn't neatly fit into those default categories. How do I understand what's there and do that at scale? Because doing that on like one or two machines, like we're going to do today, is pretty trivial. I can just go and look at those manually. But if I've got 1,000, 2,000, 10,000, being able to understand where I'm blocking things, and that might be a completely legitimate block, and I need to understand that somebody's trying to do something they shouldn't be doing and tackle that, or it could be breaking a business process, and clearly I've got to get on top of that as well. So being able to bring that data back at scale and easily in that way that Tanium does is really powerful, and I've got some examples of that we'll look at today too.
So I can imagine like just a simple classic Tanium core sensor like get running processes would be really helpful at scale here.
Yeah, you got that. If you are like a threat response customer, recorder can be quite useful here as well. But actually, the native app locker capabilities that we provide with Tanium as part of Enforce pretty much do what you need, in all honesty. You can very easily come into single endpoint view and see all of what would have been blocked if we're in an audit mode, or what has been blocked if we're in an enforcement mode, and we'll look at those as well. So loads of different ways of looking at it. You can get to the data you need very quickly.
Let's go take a look. We can talk while we demo.
Cool. Okay, so I'm in the Tanium console here. This is a cloud environment. I'm going to come into Enforce. And there's a Microsoft page that I'll go to in a second as well. So we're going to come into our policies. Like all good cooking shows, I created a policy up front because it's not terribly exciting to watch me copy and paste stuff in for 10 minutes. I'm just going to edit it though and walk you through what we've set up. So as I just alluded to, AppLocker can work in this block or permit mode, and it can also work in an audit versus enforce mode. So if we're auditing what's going on, we're saying, if I was in an enforcement mode, this is what I would have done. So I would have allowed it, I would have blocked it. So from a trying to deploy AppLocker perspective, so understanding, okay, I've created my starting rule set, what have I missed? That allows us to do that without having to disturb our business. People can still function, we can still see what's going on, and then we can tailor our rule set. And then when we're happy, we can roll it out. Equally, if we're going to make a change to our rule set, we could roll that out in an audit mode, look at the impacts of it before we enforce it.
That sounds
Nobody
like
likes
testing in production.
but it's testing safely in production.
Yeah.
Because, in reality, best will in the world, some people are fortunate enough to have test labs that represent production. You almost certainly have not got test users that represent production users. So being able to roll this safely in production in a non-intrusive way is really helpful. Just to show you kind of what the workbench looks like, then as a Microsoft article I'll bring up quickly, we're going to have a quick look at. So AppLocker concerns various different types of rules, so installers, scripts, executables. And then are we going to work in one of the two ways? So in this case, for executables, I've set this to audit mode. I've got another policy set up for blocking. So I'll show you that as well in a minute. But how we configure it is identical. And once I'm happy with my policy, I can change that to blocking very easy. I can just come in, edit it, change it to block, job done. Within Tanium as well, I can then clone an existing policy. So maybe I need to make some further changes to it. I can clone it, put that into audit mode, roll that out to my user base, see what the impact is. Once I'm happy, progress that to block mode. So it provides an easy way to iterate on our policies, again, hopefully without testing badly in production. The rules themselves and the installer, script, etc., all follow basically the same approach. You define what it is we're looking at. So in this case, I'm taking the approach of unless it's explicitly allowed, it's not allowed. And that sounds really scary because you've got things across program files, you've got things in the Windows directory. How do we make sure the thing can fundamentally work and we don't break the system? And that's where Microsoft provides some really good, useful guidance. So this page that we've linked at the bottom of the video gives you guidance as to how you should start with AppLocker. This is the executable. They provide similar guidance for installers and so on as well. What we're saying is if you're a member of the local administrators group, you should be able to run anything from anywhere. And bearing in mind, AppLocker relies on a service. If you're a local administrator, you could stop it anyway. So we're not trying to fix that particular problem. There are other tools out there for that. AppLocker isn't trying to address that. Then we're saying anyone can run any executable within the Windows directory. And obviously the Windows directory has got ACLs and so on it. So I, as a regular user on the device, couldn't go and put something in there and then run it and bypass controls. Basically, the same thing applies, but for program files, because again, that has got ACLs on it by default that mean I cannot go and plant things in there and bypass control. Now, obviously, you need to understand your environment. So if you have got a legacy app, maybe, that's requiring you to have full control over part of program files, you need to consider that as part of this approach, because you might unwittingly grant a backdoor that you don't want. So again, consider your environment, use the audit mode to see what's going on.
And non-traditional install paths that some hard-coded apps you just can't change sometimes. So there's custom jobs.
Yeah. And there are things that can help here. So those examples were all looking at paths. And that works if it's quite a broad scope, which is what this is. But there are some examples, and we'll get onto those in a minute, where actually the path might not be predictable and you want to be quite specific about the exclusions. A little bit like an antivirus exclusion. You want to be as kind of tight as you possibly can be with that. You don't want to allow a broader scope of access than you have to. But just to show you what that looks like. So if we look at this middle rule here, which is saying anything in the Windows directory can be run by anybody. Now you see we've got these type options. We've got path selected. We've also got hash and publisher. So hash is looking at the file hash. So maybe the SHA-2 hash of the file. That's fine if it's quite static. It's a bit less fine if it changes quite frequently. But things like publisher can work really well there. So the example I'm going to show you is around OneDrive. And if you're familiar with that, and the same thing applies with Teams, those applications run from the user's profile directory. So when they install, they go into app data within your user profile and they run from there. Now, in this scenario, they would get blocked, which is not ideal because we need them to function. But we need to permit that. And clearly, we don't want to allow any executable to run from the profile directory because that's what we're trying to fix with like the portable app scenario. But what we can say is the publisher must have been Microsoft and the product name, which we'll see in a minute, must be, say, Microsoft OneDrive or Microsoft Teams. And that's set by the people, Microsoft in this case, that publish the software. And I'll show you a quick trick for getting that information so you can build your rules if you need to. But the point there is that you can say, right, well, wherever you find a Microsoft Teams executable that's being published by Microsoft, so you're looking at the signature on the executable, that's okay, you can run that. So you can see how you can start stacking these rules together quite easily and being really quite flexible without it turning into a huge, long, unmanageable list.
So that raises a good point to clarify here. Stacking rules within a policy. Are we able to apply multiple policies to an endpoint, or is it one of those things where
you want one
policy wins?
Yeah, go with one policy. Just making life awkward for yourself, in all honesty. Otherwise, the rest of the page is basically the same thing. So if I flip over to my device here. So this is a Windows 11 device. This device has got that audit policy assigned to it. So we're not actually going to proactively block anything. And you can see I've got various apps installed here. And if I fire up my downloads directory, we can see in here, we've got Firefox Portable. And we can see it's in users Rob downloads. So it's not within program files. It's not within the Windows directory. I go to run that, and that's run, as you'd expect, because we're in an audit mode. We're not blocking. But from an administrator perspective, I now need to understand what's gone on here, because I might want to manage my rules. So if I come into single endpoint view for this device, and there's lots of different ways you can do this, but this is something that Tanium brings that's not default, is we provide a really easy way of seeing what's gone on. So where have we had rule hits, where we would have denied, where we would have allowed, that kind of thing. And now, there's an event.
This is part of the investigate module, is that right?
Yes. So this is part of Endpoint Management Plus. Now you get this. It's part of that solution bundle. But yeah, I mean, and you could do this in Windows as well. This is just Windows logs. I just wanted to show how you could do it with this. And there are sensors that do this too, that don't rely on this. So we'll have a look at that as well.
Yeah, because my question was where I see where this is headed. Okay, so we put a policy out there in audit mode that says, we're not wink, wink, we're not going to block this. But if the policy were to block it, we need to log that. So now we've got to go see what is falling outside the bounds of that policy that's legitimate.
I've come into the AppLocker log, and there's another one for scripting and installers. And we can see here the stuff that was allowed to run. As you'd imagine, this can be quite noisy because there's lots of stuff going on.
All right, one other question. These log names are Tanium Enforce AppLocker. So
yes,
this
is something
these
that
are not
Enforce
default
provides.
Windows logs. What's going on here?
So this is part of the value basically with Enforce, because it makes it so much easier to surface this. And then the sensors that we have that go alongside this again add to that, and we'll get onto that as well. This is kind of as clear as it possibly could be. Path to the executable, we allowed it to run, but we would have prevented it if the policy was in enforcement mode. We can also see who was the guilty party, when did it happen, and we're obviously on this device. So that allows us to do it on a one-by-one basis. Doesn't scale terribly well, but depending on what you're doing, that might be an appropriate way. Now, the next thing that we can show you is a sensor. Now, I created a saved question with this because I wanted to use it within Connect as well. But there is the question, enforce diagnostic AppLocker threat details last however many days. So I've set this to last 1 day. And I've got a few different machines here that I've scoped this down to. And I can see here the mode that AppLocker's in, the timestamp, the path to the executable, who was it, the device name, and then these event IDs are really helpful. So 8003 means I would have blocked it, so we're in audit mode. 8004 is I did block it, I'm in enforcement mode. And
You know
then
what, man? I've been at this company twice as long as you, and this is the first time I've ever seen this. This is really nice, man.
it's so
Wow.
easy.
Yeah.
Right. So what we can then do is tack that on, and this is why I created it as a saved question, to a Connect job. So Connect, if you're not familiar, is the way of getting data from Tanium into something else. That something else could be an email, as I've done here. That could be posting to my seam, which would be a really good use case for this. That could be sending to S3 or Azure Blob Storage, etc. HTTP posts, all sorts of stuff I've seen people do with it. So there's a couple of clever things we can do. So I've said, okay, my source of the data is going to be this AppLocker event saved question that I created. So that table we were just looking at, it's that data. We're going to flatten the results. And what that means is I get a neat row for every entry with all the data. So the computer name gets stacked. It's just easier to read. We don't want devices that haven't got any data. And then I've turned on this option down here, and a lot of people don't know about this. There's a filter option for new items. And what this means is Connect will remember what results have already been sent. And then I can filter and say, every time I run this, only send me what is new since the last run. So I can schedule this to run hourly, however often as I want, but I will only see new hits that have occurred since the last time this Connect job ran. So it gives me, in this scenario, a really, really easy way of just seeing what the state of play is and keeping up to date with raw hits. I say that could be where I'm auditing only or where I'm enforcing. And I turned this on earlier. So I had this send me as a CSV. So we can see exactly the same data that we were just looking at in the console, but here. So I can see the path to the file, the device, the timestamp, what mode we're in. I'll explain these two in a minute. We've got the event ID, who it was. So all that data programmatically. And if you think about then doing this at scale across your big estate, this is the sort of thing that people like to put into spreadsheets and pivot on it. You might put it into Power BI and report on it that way. Equally, and I haven't built that for this, you could go and build a report in Tanium with this data as well. So, what are the top hits for processes that are being blocked? That kind of thing. Loads of different things you could do with this really easily.
Yeah, so I'm just imagining the scenario here for our viewers. So
Yeah,
we set up a trap. If something trips that trap, we need to know, is that friend or foe? All right. Are we blocking
exactly.
something legitimate, or is somebody trying to execute malicious? So, in other words, like a drive-by download in a phishing attack, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly
all of a
that.
sudden, I've got a bunch of users that are clicking on these phishing links and it's trying to download and execute something that's not approved. I'd want to get alerted by that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly that. And, you know, the phrase sort of defense in depth gets bandied around quite a lot, but this is a really good example of it. If it's a 0-day type scenario, if you've got this type of technology out there, it doesn't matter that your EDR doesn't understand what it is yet because it doesn't have a pattern for it, because they can't run an executable from the profile directory. They can only run the stuff that's approved, which makes a huge, huge difference. So yeah, that was just an example. The GUID is all null here, incidentally, because the rule is block unless I say otherwise. Whereas if we had created a rule that said explicitly block this, we would see some information there. That's what that is about.
And we can
So
also, it's got audit and block in there. We could just filter it out to what's actually blocked, right? That's all part of the
yes,
filtering in
so
Connect.
yeah, in my saved question, the filtering I used was looking at where the event ID was either 003 or 004. Um, if I only wanted actual blocks, then I could just set that to 004. Really straightforward to do. So let's go back into the console. So we were talking about the audit approach then. So if we actually go to enforcement, what does that look like? And how do I handle the OneDrives, the Teams, and so on? So stuff that legitimately does need to run. So if I go to my other Windows 11 device, in fact, let
Oh, by the
me,
way, I just have to say this is a wonderful use of ScreenMeet as a sidebar commercial here. Plug for ScreenMeet. If you're not using ScreenMeet with Tanium for this integration of remote control and amazing for service desk, yeah, this is a good example of it.
and it's really helpful if you're doing a video because you don't have to constantly swap screens the whole time. I was like, oh, that's good. Yeah, I thought it would be good. So if we go to, right, my blocking policy. So this is almost the same, apart from we are in a blocking mode and we've got the Teams and the OneDrive policies in here. I'll show you how that works. So if I go to my second Windows 11 device, I've got that same Firefox Portable binary in here. I go to run it and I immediately get this Windows dialog pop up. Now, there is a link, and I don't know how well this will come across on the recording, but we've got this go to support option. I can click that and that will take me to whichever URL I've defined. And that's just a property of the policy itself. So if we come up here, the support URL, so that could be an intranet site, it could be service desk method to raise a ticket, that kind of thing. The other thing that can be quite useful is there's a copy option, so copy a bunch of data that you might want to paste into the ticket. So in the scenario where perhaps you blocked something legitimate, you can gather the data quite easily. Obviously, as we've just shown, there's loads of different ways of finding out what it was, but if you can get that straight from the operator of the device, it's only going to help. So we saw in this scenario, it got blocked. And we could run OneDrive and Teams and so on here as well if we wanted. So to show you how that works, this device doesn't have OneDrive or Teams permitted, but I need to go and get information about those binaries to configure the policy with. So I can open up PowerShell, and then there is this get AppLocker file information command. Let's say that after a night out. And we pass it in the executable that we're interested in. And then we want to get the publisher data. So we just run that. For this, what we care about is the publisher name and the product name. Now, as you can see here, we've got things like a version number in here. We're not interested in that. We could use it if we wanted to, but actually what we're saying is if it's the OneDrive product and it's signed by Microsoft, I'm happy. That's what I'm interested in. So if I come to my policy and then look at OneDrive, for example, we'll see here that we've got the publisher, the product name. If I wanted to, I could put OneDrive exe in there. I could put a file version in there as well. These are quite helpful as well. So if perhaps there has been some sort of nasty vulnerability with a particular piece of software, you're saying it can run, but it's got to be at least this level, another option to do that. So, yeah, understands file versions, obviously requires whoever produced the binary to be signing it, to put that kind of information in there. But if it is, you can use it and you can consume it.
This is really well done. Wow.
It's really slick and it's really easy to get up and running with, which is the whole point. So if we go to single endpoint view again and Windows events, connect to our second device. So this is the same interface we were looking at, but it's for the device I was just looking at, which is in the blocking mode. As we saw, I ran that portable app, it denied it.
Yeah, and this may, I mean, this is real world. It may spin for a minute, right? Because this device could be anywhere in the world, and we're doing a direct live connection to that event, where then we can get access to the registry and the event log and all those other Windows artifacts.
Yeah, I mean, this machine is a VM in my house in the UK. This environment is on the west coast of the US. So there's a fair bit of latency between here and there. If we look at the event log again, we can see where things have been permitted. So Edge was allowed to run various other components. One of the
And
other
I
things
just want to
can,
point out too, I mean, just
yeah,
this is 101 stuff, right? But that little filters expansion, you can expand that and just filter by
yeah.
the event ID.
So, gosh, it's like you read my mind. So you can put the event ID in and do it that way, or because blocks are shown as errors, you could just hit that button. A permitted one is just shown as informational. You might have clocked when we were just in audit mode, they'll be shown as warnings. But for instance, we can expand here and we can see that we tried to run Firefox Portable, and in this instance, it was prevented, and our guilty party was Ashley this time. So,
that dastardly Ashley.
yeah,
Yep.
I know. Can't take him anywhere. This data is also surfaced with that same sensor. So we can see here, I was messing around with this earlier on, making sure that we're in a good place. We can see that our event type was a block. Again, we've got the device name, the user, the path, timestamp, and so on. That's kind of it in a nutshell. Clearly, most organizations are going to be a little bit more complicated than I've just shown you. But that is how I would approach setting it up and how I have approached setting it up in the past. And then you can just iterate on it using audit mode, promote it to a block, so on and so forth.
And of course, this is all in the context of everything else that Enforce offers. So you can target these
Yeah.
policies by computer groups so that, and those are dynamically defined. So you can find those critical machines, the tagged machines, whatever you've built for that.
What are
So
the
that,
criteria? Yeah.
yeah, any criteria. Yeah.
That I've seen people use things like subnets of the devices to track them when they move into a different VLAN that's associated with a different function. A particular piece of software being installed is often an indicator of the role. It depends on how tightly controlled the environment is, and this is something that can be really useful in that respect.
Well, you talk about flexibility. I mean, you and I came up in the Active Directory days, and it's like, if you have an OU with a group policy assigned to it, that's not as precise as what we can do here with the computer groups. So
No,
it does give
and
you a lot more flexibility.
yeah, and then if you think about modern device management, as Microsoft often refers to it, so Intune, etc., that doesn't have a concept of a hierarchical OU structure. It's just a flat directory, and it's actually doing similar things that Tanium does in terms of it's looking at attributes associated with devices to group them logically or otherwise.
So I'm glad you mentioned Intune, and because there's one other technology I want to make sure we talk about here, because I know it's going to be top of mind for some of our users. So Windows WDAC AppControl
Yeah,
is another way to do this, which is similar to AppLocker. What's the difference here, and does Tanium do both of those?
it's different in that there are some things it doesn't do that AppLocker does. Likewise, it approaches things that AppLocker doesn't do. In short, we don't cover it. So we look after AppLocker only, largely because from the feedback we've had from customers, people in the field that have done it, AppLocker gives a better level of flexibility. And that's the approach we've taken up until now. I think there are some technology challenges around trying to manage WDAC at scale as well, partially why we are firmly AppLocker at the moment. But equally, as you've been here longer than I have, Tanium doesn't stand still. So who knows what we might do in the future? But I'm not PM, so I can't make any
Yeah,
statements around that.
yeah. Yeah, well, thank you. And I know this is basically the answer. The short answer is no, we don't do app control today. You're welcome to use it. Obviously, we're a Microsoft partner, and I hope you use
Yeah.
all their technologies. But there's a link in the show notes below that'll help our viewers today to a Microsoft article that talks about when you would use one over the other. And like Rob said, the feedback from the field that we've gotten is that we have the most demand for AppLocker, so that's where we focus our efforts. Yeah. So, Rob, if we are enforcing policies of executables on Windows devices and we're doing that with the Tanium client, how do we make sure that AppLocker is not blocking the Tanium client?
That's a good one. So if you follow the Microsoft out the box guidance, which as remember, if we said permit anything from anyone to run anything from the Windows directory and the program files directory, Tanium's good because we're in the program files directory. Again, this comes down to understanding your estate, assuming that you haven't changed the ACLs over the whole program files directory, and I really hope you haven't. Then it's protected from people dropping stuff in there to bypass your controls, but because it is in there, it can run. So you don't need to do anything special for us in the same way that Office will work. So people can still launch Outlook, they can still run Edge, and the other tools that they might have deployed to that device.
So that's good news. There's no exceptions to manage for
Nope.
Tanium because it's already there. It's in the program directory.
Yep. Easy peasy.
So, Rob, how do people manage these policies today? And is it potential that Tanium's Enforce could conflict with their other AppLocker policies?
Potentially, yeah. It depends what their tools they are. And this is a fairly common conversation when it comes to Enforce. So they might have Intune, they might be using Group Policy, they might be managing it locally. They could be using another endpoint management type tool that's manipulating it in some way. It's the starting point is going to be the key thing here. So understanding what's on the estate. It is really obvious if you're using AppLocker. We can go and look for indications that there's policies in place. We didn't show it, but one of the things you can do is import an existing AppLocker policy from Group Policy. So you can export them as XML, and you don't want to look at it, but you can then import that directly into Tanium and then pick up the management there. So if you decide I want to come bring my existing policy across, I haven't got to write rekeyed or anything, export it as it is, bring it into Tanium, and then you would perform a change in terms of unenforcing the policy on the Group Policy side, enforcing it on the Tanium side. If you happen to miss something or there's a timing issue, one of the things that Enforce does, if it's a domain join device, for example, we enforce our policies in line with Group Policy refresh. So you won't get a scenario where Group Policy sets a setting to A, we want to set it to B, and then they bounce back or forwards. We'll pick up that something else is already changing or managing that setting that we're interested in, and we'll flag that we couldn't enforce this because there's something else already doing it, which is a key value of Enforce because it's telling you that we couldn't do this. It hasn't just silently not happened. It's exposed that, yeah, we can't do this because the policy is going to change back and you need to go and change that. So it allows you to understand what the current state of play is and move forward from there.
I mean, that's exporting a group policy, importing that. It can't get easier than that. That's amazing. I mean, this is a complicated task, really, but
Yes,
to
you can
have
get
that
into the weeds.
usability, wow.
Yeah.
And then what we hear often from our customers is that, hey, I've got a bazillion Active Directory domains, and trying to manage group policy across all those places is a challenge. It's just the
Yes.
nature of it, right? And so here with Tanium, we have a flat management surface that really helps.
Yeah. I mean, if you think what Group Policy's got to be, what, 25 years old now, hasn't it? It's Windows 2000. I can remember getting
Hmm.
involved with it as NT4 was going away. And over that 20, 25 years, organizations have been through M&As, and we all know with that kind of activity, you never really get rid of the old one, do you? Most organizations have more than one AD forest to tackle. And as you say, you've then got to keep the policies in sync everywhere, all the detailed, nuanced little settings, making sure you actually applied it versus the Tanium agents applied. We don't particularly care about one forest versus another.
Well, anything else as we wrap this up today, Rob?
I think we're good. This is quite a short one for me. I normally ramble on for at least an hour, but
Yeah, you usually get those long walkthrough videos, but this has been good, man. We can show value quickly, like you said, with this. And so if I try to recap for our viewers, like what's this process look like? So I'm going to set up a policy in audit mode.
yep,
I'm going to go look at those logs and set up my traps so I can get some of those logs forwarded to me in a SIM or wherever, or just go through single endpoint view there with investigate. I'm going to tweak my policy according to my findings, and then flip that exact same policy or clone it and enforce to a block mode from audit, and then just report on it going forward and monitor that, which I say just report on it. There's a guy here at Tanium, Tim Morris. He always says that, as soon as you set up any kind of policy in the enterprise, you got to have an exception process.
yes.
So that's the trick, because there's so many different possibilities there that you got to be careful with. But,
Yeah, and I mean, and that's
yeah.
why, as often with these things, you sort of want to probably take quite a few iterative approaches, and little and often in terms of change is probably my preferred method. Equally, when we come around to turning it on, probably turn it on bits of the estate at once. I wouldn't advocate doing 100% in one hit. That's probably a bit bold, and definitely not on a Friday afternoon.
No changes on Friday afternoon. That's
No.
right. First rule of IT. Yep. Well, Rob, thanks again for another great episode on Microsoft technologies, how Tanium can really help our folks in the trenches in IT. So thank you for coming back to the show. And folks, if you'd like to meet Rob in person, again, coming up at Converge Orlando this November, in the show notes, there's a free pass link code that you can use there. Would love to meet you in person at Converge. And also, as usual, in the show notes below, there's links to things like docs and KBs, both Tanium and Microsoft articles that'll really help you as you're beginning this journey with AppLocker. So this is super. I hope you found this super helpful. I've learned a few things today. So until next time, go Tanium.
Easy peasy.